Camera 2 rolling. Going to do clap sync. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Hi. As of filming this, I'm 10 weeks into my MLIS program. Earlier this year, I graduated with my bachelor's in history with a focus on the medieval Middle East, and I made the big decision to go right into grad school. The amount of academic burnout that I'm facing is immense, but we're here anyways. Coming into the program, I was completely set on pursuing a career somewhere in the realm of Islamic manuscripts, and kind of had this vision in my head of being a queer academic, kind of like a cuntier Indiana Jones. My perception of archives was entirely based off of an internship experience I had at the Irish Architectural Archive in 2022. I was tightly held in this European idea of archives with dusty old bureaucratic institutions, aging databases and aging archive staff, and rows of archival stacks overflowing with documents. While interning at the IAA, my exposure to archival work was limited to acquisition, processing.
Archives are pretty cool. Look at this shit. Ooh. Archive.
And digitizing. But within the first couple of weeks of this program, a dizzying amount of introductions and icebreakers, and my first foray into the foundational aspects of archiving, my perception of what an archive is and what it can be has changed dramatically. To be honest, I'm still kind of confused on the question, what is an archive? But this video is my attempt at answering that, kind of. Like I said, I'm still confused. I'm not really planning to give a succinct answer to any of that. But I want to at least capture the way that my mind works in thinking of these fuzzier concepts like archives, which is such a big and scary word with so much underneath it. But yeah, I don't know. This is my attempt at that. Alright, so the International Council on Archives, which is the largest multinational archival governing body, actually has a pretty good answer for what an archive is. They say that archives are documentary byproduct of human activity retained for their long-term value. They come in a variety of formats, including text, photographs, video, sound, analog, and digital. Archives are held by individuals and institutions, both public and private, around the world, with the buildings housing them often sharing the name of archives. Cool. Video over. No more recording. We're making this 2 minutes and no longer. But yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to any of that. Matter of fact, I think it's a really good definition. But I don't think it's all-encompassing enough, which is why I've got an answer that is much less categorically satisfying, but what I think is a little more intellectually and emotionally stimulating. I'm not one to love the idea of carving the world up into neat little boxes. I mean, I fucking hate the Enlightenment, and I've got, 3 different pronouns? I'm not really in the business of rigid categories. So instead, I'm gonna put that history degree to use and make some connections. I've got quite a couple examples that I'll put forth and attach to qualities that I believe archives embody, so that by the end of this video, I can prove to you that an archive is just a collective extension of the mind and body, theoretically accessible by all in a mass effort of collective memory keeping, sort of like a rudimentary hive mind. That archives are organisms, that they're organic, that archiving is the process of altering the mind and body of this organism, embedding memory and meaning within its cells, and ultimately, that humans are archives, and archives are human. Archives, just like us, are systems. They're institutions constructed to manifest memory in the physical world, interlinking the memory of individuals with each other. They are biomimicry of our biological processes and memory systems on a non-biological grand scale, but quintessentially human in their essence. I love a bit of transhumanism. The idea of archives as organic is nothing new. Matter of fact, it's been with the doctrine since its early days, first appearing in the Dutch manual with its paleontological metaphors that described an archive as an organism possessing a skeleton, record keeping and making as the deposit of sedimentary residues, and the profession itself as akin to that of the paleontologist. The manual even directly states that an archival collection is an organic whole, a living organism which grows, takes shape, and undergoes changes in accordance with fixed rules. Similarly, I'm not the first to come up with the idea of human bodies as akin to records or archives. There are many real-world examples of both, which can be seen in traditional tattoos or oral traditions that render humans repositories of cultural knowledge. Even colonial institutions that hold the stolen remains of ancestors from cultures the world over recognize the body as a record. But I'd like to go one step forward. I fully believe that archives are as human as us, and that we are as archival as an archive. I know that seems like a stretch, and it's definitely going to take a lot of convincing to get you anywhere near my position, but I'd be damned if I didn't try. Before we continue down that path, I ask that you try to flex your muscles of empathy and imagination. But without empathy, there is little chance that we can envision ourselves in the roles of another, and without imagination, we could never visualize anything outside of the often emotionally and mentally stifling structures of our current age. Because of this, I'll be drawing heavily upon fiction in addition to real-world examples and convincing you of the overlaps between archives and humanity. Fiction, specifically sci-fi and fantasy, have been integral to evolving my understanding of the world, my place in it, and the connections with the many wondrous things that inhabit it. They've influenced my transition, my academic pursuits, my desires for my future, tinting my worldview with fantastic possibilities of what could be. And now, though I doubt I'll do all the work in this video alone, I hope to use the stories and concepts near and dear to my heart to add a bit of excitement to how you interpret the world around you. I really gave myself a big task with this one. Yay! Ugh. The first example that I'd like to introduce you to is one that I'd imagine most Middle Eastern medievalists are well aware of. It's the Cairo Geniza. A Geniza is a repository found in many Jewish communities for pieces of writing that contain the name of God. The Jewish funerary prohibition on cremation is extended to discarded papers, making the Geniza a kind of paper cemetery. Here we see human traits applied to non-human objects by giving these papers bearing the name of God the same respect as a human body, treating them as vessels for the soul. From 1890 to 1897, some 400,000 pieces of material were collected from the Ben Ezra Synagogue in Cairo. These materials document the social, economic, and political histories of Cairo and the broader Mediterranean from about 6th to the 19th centuries, all through a uniquely Jewish Mediterranean lens. St. Gautien, the preeminent scholar on the Cairo Geniza, makes a point to describe it as the antithesis of an archive. He writes that the Geniza is the opposite of an archive. In an archive, one keeps documents in order to use them if and when necessary, and that in an orderly archive, material of the same character normally is kept together in one place, which makes it easy to get information about one topic. However, in the Geniza, everything is topsy-turvy. He also notes that, like the human body, records are put in the Geniza with the express purpose of saving them for future resurrection, which seems to directly negate his claim that the Geniza does not save things for future use. It just happens that this future use is a little more divine than what most would think of when thinking of archiving. Writing in the 1960s, his idea of an archive is rigid and held within the European ideals of total organization, categorization, and ease of access. He gives little thought to the possibility that an archive can be none of these things, choosing to see the Geniza for all that it is not, rather than what it is. Yet he also notes that, like the human body, writings are put into the Geniza with the intention to preserve them for resurrection. What the Geniza is an example of the organic accumulation of archival material. Whether intentional or not, Archives accumulate through organic processes, just like the Dutch manual described with the metaphor of depositing sediments. And with that, we have the first trait that I believe archives embody: organic accumulation. I'm gonna have a list somewhere over here, or maybe it's over here. Who knows which side? It'll be somewhere. But I'm gonna tally up all of the things that we have so that we can keep track of them for later. And with that, we've got one down and an invariable amount to go. Yay! To be quite honest, I'm kind of outlining this video as I go. Who knows how many examples I'll have at the end? Technically, I do right now. The script is done, but when I was writing the script, I didn't. So now you're getting that. In the frigid waste of the Arctic, there's an unassuming structure. It juts out of the side of a mountain, a gray and blocky concrete structure reminiscent of a bomb shelter, blending in with the monochromatic stone and snow that safeguard the secrets within. That's right, baby, it's the Svalbard Seed Vault. Woo! Seed Vault, love a Seed Vault. Hell yeah, let's go, Svalbard Seed Vault, yeah! Anyways, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault it's a seed vault, it's in the name. It currently holds 1,331,458 seed samples, covering a range of 6,297 species from 123 depositors, some from nations, some from multinational organizations, and others from gene banks across the world. To ensure the survival of its samples, it was built into the permafrost on a mountainous Norwegian archipelago called Svalbard, which is right here. The seed vault and other gene banks like it exist to protect the genetic diversity of cultivated crops. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault deals specifically with humanity's most integral food crops, hoping to safeguard their seeds against climate change or threats to crop diversity. As highlighted in Veritasium's tour of the Seed Vault in 2016, war-torn regions like Syria are among the first to withdraw seeds from the gene bank to replenish their own regional gene banks and regional crop diversity. In this video, he also discusses the accession process for seeds with an employee at the Seed Vault, and it's stated that they explicitly do not take substances considered illicit by the Norwegian government or GMOs. And as a member of communities that have been consistently and intentionally left out of the archival record, I have a little bit of a gripe, a lot of a gripe, with governments deciding what is deemed archivable. But I'll get back to that. Interestingly, the Svalbard Seed Vault falls outside of the ICA definition of an archive. Its focus is not text, nor is it photographs or video or sound, it's seeds. Yet, by all intents and purposes, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault is an archive. It's an intentional and organic accumulation of things with the explicit intention of storing them for future use. Veritasium's look into the vault shows that it's archival both in physical and digital structure as well, with rows and rows of seeds stored in large boxes and shelves in industrial bays, and a digital database that's kept up to date with the publicly accessible data of what's in each box. So with that, we've got our second trait of archives, that everything is a record, which may be a little hard to believe. I got a really good example this week in a presentation for my class Information Studies 431. I wonder what class that is. I wonder who teaches that class. That'd be crazy if this was that class. But the presentation was given by a doctoral student named Nicole Wood, and during it, she described Earth archives, which are natural structures or processes on the Earth that allow us to take looks back millions and millions of years into like Earth history. This can be things like ice cores, tree rings. What are the other examples? I have it written down somewhere, but ice cores and tree rings really stood out to me just because I really like the layered structure, because it really speaks to the like sedimentary deposit that the Dutch manual spoke about. But yeah, trait 2. Everything is a record. From this point on, I'm going to start getting a little bit more conceptual. The last two were pretty concrete examples of archiving, even though the Cairo Geniza is a little bit wonky on that one. They're both physical buildings, which could be described as archives, and they both house materials, physical materials that you can go and interact with. But going forward, I'd like to do away with the idea of an archive as a place and think more broadly of the archive as a conceptual structure. Whether that structure is physical, digital, or mental is not important for the upcoming examples. That brings us to example number 3, which is not a single archive, but a pattern of archiving: the intentional storage of seeds in the hair of African women during the crossing of the Middle Passage. In essence, the intention of these enslaved peoples were the exact same as those who built the Svalbard seed vault. Facing a radical shift in their existence, they had the foresight to ensure that no matter what, they would have a connection to their homeland through their cultural foodways. In doing so, they transformed their bodies into archives, embodying the third and fourth trait that I believe all archives embody: that archives are transitory, both in space and time, keep that for later, and that archives are cultural. As far as my research could tell, there was no documented evidence of this practice. Everything that we know comes to us from oral histories that are shared between women in various maroon communities across South America and parts of the Americas. For as long as I could tell, this was the only way that I knew this story. I just took it as fact because I had heard it from my grandparents or other black elders that this is how these crops got to the Americas. It's kind of just like established fact within African American communities. In addition to oral tradition, it comes to us through hairstyles, and as of recent, genetic tests that show that rice varietals in the Americas are linked to cultivars still grown in West Africa today. Connections to the homeland are attained through strong oral traditions, an alternative to the institutional archival practices that shun our histories, which instead maintain marvelously biased histories that are overwhelmingly colonial and deem the histories of minority populations unworthy of archiving. See, I told you I'd get back to it. For those across the globe lacking in socioeconomic power, those with little influence upon the systems that attempt to grind them to dust beneath their heels, the body is one of the few things that we can control, and even now that's up for debate. To maintain connections to the past, connections to a sense of self and community that stretches beyond the now, the body is rendered as both record and archive, and memory becomes intangible. This is the 5th trait of an archive, that memory exists in both physical and cognitive spaces. In our world, smothered as it is by centuries of colonialism and empire, traditional memory-keeping practices are acts of protest. They threaten established order by granting the disenfranchised lenses through which to envision themselves in radically different circumstances, driving them to act, to connect, to protest, and to make change. For me, the genres of sci-fi and fantasy are another one of the lenses through which we can imagine our total emancipation. They suffuse the lessons of the past with the here and now, brewing a concoction rich with possibilities for a liberated future, expanding our perceptions of what we are, what we were, and what we can be. Within the last year, Brandon Sanderson has quickly risen to become my favorite fantasy author. When I first started reading his Mistborn series, I was quickly drawn to his hard magic system. You may be asking, what's hard magic? You may also be asking, what's soft magic? Well, here's a handy chart. For some examples, hard magic is something like Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's got a logical magic system. If you do one thing, this is gonna happen. But soft magic is more wishy-washy. It's kind of like the Force in Star Wars, a lot less concrete, a lot more mystery as to what can happen. From there, I read Warbreaker, Elantris, the Stormlight Archives, Arcanum Unbound, a couple of Stormlight novellas, and I just recently finished the first 3 books in the second Mistborn series. Though each series takes place in the same universe called Cosmere, the diversity of magic systems is astounding, and I could easily make a whole video talking about just the magic in Brandon Sanderson's books, but for the sake of me editing this and you grading this or watching this recreationally if you want to do that, I'm not gonna do that. Instead, I'm going to focus on 2 aspects of the Cosmere. Also, if you hadn't picked up, I'm going to be doing some massive spoilers for the Cosmere, so if you had any intentions of reading any of Brandon Sanderson's work in the future, just stop watching now. The rest of the video is not going to make sense to you, but stop watching now. Those 2 aspects will be Feruchemy, which is a varietal magic in the Mistborn series, and the Cognitive Realm, which is a place/concept. It's confusing, but I'll get into it later. Feruchemy is a part of Mistborn's 3-pronged magic system. The other 2 are Allomancy and Chemomancy, but those are not important right now. Feruchemical powers store specific aspects in pieces of metal jewelry called mines that feruchemists can later tap to access the stored attributes. For instance, an iron mine stores weight, a brass mine stores warmth, and a gold mine stores health. For this video, I'll be focusing on copper mines, which feature prominently in the first era of Mistborn, seen most often in relation to the Terrismen Sazed. The Terris are an ethnic group in the Mistborn world that have been relegated to roles of servitude, with their genetic propensities for feruchemy actively bred out of them by the Lord Ruler, a kind of a dictator, if you couldn't tell by the title. Are you kidding me? Lord Ruler is the most fascist title that you could take. You would have to be like Hitler too if you wanted anything more fascist. Anyways, the Lord Ruler did this in a deliberate act of cultural genocide, trying to take these feruchemists, which could be a threat to his reign, and squash them beneath his heel by taking away the very cultural aspects that made them powerful in the first place. Unlike the majority of Terris, Sazed is a member of the Synod, an ancestral Terris governing body who possessed the noble goal of preserving the cultural and religious memories of the world before the Lord Ruler's despotic reign. In protecting these memories, the Synod employs people like Sazed as keepers, pretty much keepers of knowledge. They store memory in their bracers or copper jewelry of times before the Lord Ruler's millennium-long rule. Prior to his rule, the planet was green, it was luscious, but since he's come to power, the world has become covered in ash, and the only memories of the past are kept within copper mines. In the pursuit of preservation, each keeper oversees an area of expertise, with the 2 examples given in the series being Sazed with his focus on religion, and the Terris woman Kindwill with her focus on historic leaders. They maintain this knowledge through the use of copper mines, learning from past keepers and intermittently updating their copper mines with relevant information. Facing intellectual and epistemic suppression by the state, the Terris employ feruchemy, a deeply cultural magic, to transform themselves into archives, vast bodies of memory and information, able to slide into the radar of the Final Empire and exist in a constant transitory state. In the culmination of the first Mistborn era, Sazed imbibes the shards of preservation and ruin, the 2 governing forces on the planet of Scadrial, where the events of Mistborn take place. With his newfound godhood, he draws upon his collective knowledge of religions to place the planet back into a state of equilibrium, creating a world of abundance with blue skies, rolling green plains, and reviving plants and animals from an age-long past. He gives space to every religion stored within his copper mines, as unique and integral to the experience of life on the planet, drawing from each and every one to color his vision of a reborn world. As an archive, Sazed checks off every trait on his list. His knowledge is accumulated organically through processes of learning. His documents are both memory and his copper mines. As a living thing, he is transitory. His archival practice is based in cultural means of memory keeping, and his memory is stored in both physical his copper mines, and cognitive, his memories, spaces. He exists as a fantasy extrapolation of all the many forms of traditional memory keeping that color the terrific and fascinating world we inhabit, whether that's oral traditions, dance, tattoos, or other intangible heritages. While he does love hard magic, Sanderson is not one to stray away from more fuzzy concepts. The cognitive realm is the perfect example. Sanderson divides the Cosmere into three distinct realms: the physical realm, the cognitive realm, and the spiritual realm. The physical realm is kind of self-explanatory. It's where everything physical is. We're in the physical realm right now. The spiritual realm, also kind of self-explanatory. It deals with matters of the soul. But the cognitive realm is kind of a big outlier. And I'm still very confused about it, especially how it interacts with copper mines. He's written nothing about that. I can kind of only speculate. But oh well. He details the cognitive realm best in his series, The Stormlight Archives, which actually has characters going in and out of the cognitive realm and interacting with beings there. Across the series, we're exposed to parts of it that exist as a reflection of the world of Roshar. This mirrored world is called Shadesmar, and is inhabited by a type of being called Spren. According to the Cosmere Wiki, Spren are fragments of the powers of creation that have gained sentience through the influence of sapient beings on Roshar. Similar fragments of other powers of creation exist on other worlds in Cosmere, but Spren, in my opinion, are the most interesting by far. They're essentially human cognition given life. Living ideas, living concepts, each unique individuals with motivations, desires, and personalities of their own. I'm not going to list the full spectrum of lesser Spren because that is a list that is far too long. In terms of the more human, true Spren, there are Ash Spren, Cryptics, Cultivation Spren, High Spren, Honor Spren, Ink Spren, Keen Spren, Mist Spren, Peak Spren, Reachers, and Oathgate Spren. These are all just the ones that have been covered in the books. In terms of Keen Spren, there's only a mention to them. But there could be many, many, many more. Who knows? Only Sanderson does, I guess. I bring up Spren because they're an interesting case in understanding memory and ideas as living things. We tend to think of information as something completely static, human, inorganic, but Sanderson gives us another path. We can instead envision cognition and all of its byproducts as living, breathing things with lives of their own. Though their lives may not map one-to-one ours as humans, giving information the same respect we would give another person seems like a lesson I'd like to take with me on my pursuit of understanding archiving and our interactions with archives and the information held within. Sanderson's use of logic-governed hard magic, his mapping of copper mines to real-world forms of memory keeping, and his ideas of cognition spawning a world completely different from our own, yet eerily similar, has allowed for me to take a step back and imagine the ways that we interpret systems of memory keeping. By speaking to me in the familiar language and tropes of fantasy, and adding his own unique touch, I was able to comprehend the complexity that comes with envisioning humans as beings of memory, and memory as a living thing. We are biological constructions that exist and prosper only because of our archival nature, our ability to remember, to store information within ourselves, and transfer that memory and information to others. As I'm writing this script, I've been engaging heavily with the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, specifically with her book, Emergent Strategy. I've attempted to read this book in the past with not a ton of success, but I feel like I've gotten to a point in my life where Brown's teachings in this book would really, really help me. When I first attempted to read the book, I didn't get past the first half of the introduction. I was deeply intrigued by the ideas of imagination and the recognition of social, emotional, and natural systems that govern our lives as a path towards envisioning a future that I want to build for myself and those I love. But reading it now, I've grown. I'm further along in my transition. I've got a fucking bachelor's degree, which I still think is crazy. I don't know why they gave me that. And I'm making a life for myself that I couldn't have conceived of a couple years ago. I'm finally building community with other trans folk like me, and it's been wonderful and healing and fantastic in literally every single part. On the second read, I've come to realize that Adrienne Marie Brown and I are quite similar. We're both the product of interracial marriages between a black father and a white mother, which they say has given them and their immediate family the ability to see what's between, what connects the things that seem separate, the ever-present whole. Something I resonate with heavily. We're both queer. We experience the world from the fringes, looking at the center from an outside perspective, allowing us to identify oppressive structures that others might glance over. And we're both massive fans of sci-fi and fantasy. Adrienne Marie Brown, I'm really sorry. Most of my favorite sci-fi and fantasy is written by cishet white men. I promise I'll read Octavia Butler. I really need to, but Sanderson is on my mind. But I'll get to it, I swear. I couldn't find any evidence, but I do have a sneaking suspicion that Adrienne, like me, is also neurodivergent. I've been thinking deeply about neurodivergence for the past couple of years as I've come to face the reality that I likely have autism, ADHD, or both, and that many of the patterns in my life can best be explained by one or both of these conditions. This realization has come to me as I've learned that most of my closest friends are some flavor of neurodivergent, and that I've always meshed best with folks that perceive and experience the world in unique ways. For me, this manifests as an understanding of the world through its systems. As long as I can remember, I've always thought of the world as a structured set of systems that influence the actions of everybody and everything. Maybe this was a way of creating order out of chaos for a scared child, but maybe this is just how my brain works. Thinking this way has allowed for me to recognize that the systems that make me me are the same that make everything and everybody what they are. We are all at the mercy of fixed processes, no matter how hard we try to deny them. Of course, we can push and pull here and there, but systems govern our life. Thinking this way has made me an incredibly empathetic person, which has its ups and downs. Sometimes I'm taken advantage of, sometimes empathy clouds my judgment, and I think that I understand a person's position too well and misinterpret an argument. Sometimes I hurt people because I believe that they share the same empathy I do and can understand all of the reasons that I say or did something, completely ignoring how their own emotions might color their perceptions of what I've done. It's not a perfect existence, but it's my existence. And who even knows if there is a perfect existence? I don't think so. This is why emergent strategy and its focus on recognizing ourselves as part of larger natural systems speaks so heavily to me. Adrienne Marie Brown puts to words the exact way I understand the world, and it's therapeutic to read, if not a bit haunting in its accuracy. Her lessons provide a solid foundation for continuing to grow as a person in this scary and turbulent world, comforting me in times of uncertainty by recognizing and giving space to the relationships between myself, others, and the inescapable processes that frame our existence. I'm gonna say that there's a 50-50 chance that you're either completely following this video or you're like entirely and utterly lost. I know I've kind of gone through a whirlwind of like semi-coherent ramblings and like prophesizing. So I do not blame you if you fall in camp 2. If you are in camp 2, you're probably also wondering, what the hell do I take away from this video? And for you, I have this. This video was my attempt at explaining the way I've come to understand archives and processes of memory keeping. I wanted to capture just a sliver of the connections I make when trying to understand complicated concepts, and hopefully help others who could benefit from this way of thinking. I don't expect you to agree with me that archives are humans and humans are archives. I know it's a big step to take, but I'd hope you at least think a little more about how much we share in common with the non-biological world around us. All human creations are imbued with sparks of our humanity. The social structures we create and live by, the institutions that uphold our nation states, systems of economy, archives, they're all organic, human. By recognizing the shared humanity in things we create, we can augment the world to be a little less rigid, to augment structures that suppress and instead make just ones to live by, and ultimately to experience life at its fullest. So, what is an archive? We are